a great pleasure for us to have as a guest Dr. Geert Molengerghs from Belgium in Encuentros con la Estadística, Encounters with Statistics. Professor Molengerghs is professor at Hazard University and currently director of the Inter-University Institute of Biostatistics and Statistical Bioinformatics of both Hazard and Leuven universities. He has been co-editor of Biometrics and president of the International Biometric Society. Thank you for finding some space in your schedule for us.
A great pleasure. Thank you.
We want to speak with Dr. Molengerghs about his views, experiences, and opinions related to the practice of statistics. Good afternoon and welcome, Professor.
Good afternoon to both of you.
Okay. To begin with, can you please summarize your path in terms of studies and professional experience to reach this point in your career?
Yeah, actually, I studied mathematics when I was an undergraduate student in the University of Antwerp, also in Belgium. And actually, I started on a PhD after I graduated, and that was planned to be in pure mathematics, actually algebra. So that seems a little different from statistics, of course, even though statistics is also a mathematical science. But how did I end up in not only in statistics, but actually in biostatistics and applied statistics? Well, this was still the time that we had to do either, men at least, either military service or civil service. And I did civil service in the academic hospital in Leuven, where I worked in the department of Emmanuel Safre, and Geert Verbeke was also there already as a PhD student. And during that time, which actually interfered with my PhD period, I can put it this way, I fell in love with statistics, with applied statistics, because I liked the fact that it was very mathematically based, but at the same time, it worked with real life data and you could actually contribute to real world problems. Of course, if you work in an academic hospital, that is going to be health, clinical trials or epidemiological studies and what have you. So when this period was over, I decided, with the permission of the various universities involved, to switch my career path from algebra to biostatistics. And so I got my PhD in biostatistics then in the year 1993 indeed. And at that time, actually just a little bit after I graduated, there was a position for a professor in biostatistics. There was a position for a biostatistician in the University of Hasselt, and that turned out to be the first position actually in statistics in a very long time in Belgium. So I applied and somehow got a position, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And actually, before taking up my position for good at Hasselt University, I spent a time in Harvard University in the Department of Biostatistics at the Harvard School of Public Health, where I worked with people like Louise Ryan, for example, who more recently also was president of the International Biometric Society, with Steve Flagakos, the late Steve Flagakos, because he passed away in a tragic accident a number of years ago. But he was the head of the AIDS clinical trials group. And actually, for me, that was my initial exposure to infectious diseases, in fact, which has never gone away from what we do in our department with colleagues like, for example, Neil Hens working in that area, very important now in COVID times. So that's been a very important point in my career, because, yeah, I really liked the work that I was doing. I had been to a few conferences also outside of Belgium, because Belgium is a small country, so it's quick and easy to be abroad. For example, to the UK, where then and still now applied statistics was very far advanced, because we all know, of course, that quite a bit of applied statistics, especially in the biomedical sciences, but also in agriculture and forestry, etc., comes out of the Anglo-Saxon tradition. Not uniquely, but in the 1990s, still the 1980s and 1990s, statistics in continental Europe in many countries was still, for a large extent, mathematical statistics. So that exposure to the Anglo-Saxon world was quite important for me. And so the United States in particular was an eye-opener. And ever since, and that's true to this day, I've kept contact with the United States, not only there, of course, because also with many people and many colleagues in many other countries across the world. So this is a few things of my, let's say, early career stage indeed.
Thank you, Professor.
Beyond the undoubted importance of your work or your work has had in science, what impact do you think this activity has on society in general?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think if we talk about the impact or the image that statistics has in society, that is we have to face that's not always the most sexy profession that people think about.
Yes.
And my wife is an astronomer, and I can tell you from experience that for decades, if you meet people, we all know and we can guess where the interest of the partner goes to. But that said, of course, we are very important in ways that are not always clear. For example, a lot of epidemiology, for example, and of course there's a lot of statistics in epidemiology, but just to give that example, is devoted to prevention. By doing our work properly, by, for example, now, I have to give a few COVID examples, of course, also, but by, for example, predicting that under certain circumstances, under certain, let's say, relaxations of measures, that there will be a new wave. If people act upon that, that wave will not happen. Or it will not happen to the same extent. We all know that, and we've seen good and also many bad examples around the globe. But of course, as I said, that's not always the most fancy thing that people think about. But I often say to people, every young child would like to be a policeman or a fireman, for example. But think of a fireman. They think it's great and it's very impressive, etc. And if you would say, what about the prevention officer? People would say, what is that, etc. But I mean, if you think about it, in my house, I would prefer a visit of the prevention officer over, of course, the fireman, because then you know that there is a problem. So likewise, when, for example, we think of our colleagues who work in agriculture, by doing proper statistical trials, in agriculture, for example, food production can improve, whereas the environmental footprint can go down. So there is an important contribution to a sustainable economy from statistics also. And by and large, having worked in biomedical sciences, but more generally in biometry, let's use that word. After all, you refer to the fact that once I was president of the International Biometric Society, and still to this day, executive editor of biometrics. Biometry combines the fact that you can contribute in important areas and important ways to food, to health, and to many other, and to the environment, and to many other vital parts of our society and well-being as human beings on this planet, while also doing stuff that is actually fun to do, because after all, it's nice to contribute. But if you like I do, a certain amount of mathematics, and the applications, and the two come together. That's wonderful. I mean, you can make a hobby out of something that actually serves society quite nicely.
Yeah, it's very true. But we
Yeah.
are a little bit behind the scenes sometimes.
Yeah.
It's exactly true. Yeah.
Professor, uh, we want to change a little bit about the topic. In that order, can you comment what has been the moment most satisfactory in your life?
Yeah, it depends, of course, if you talk about professional life or life in general. Huh?
Yeah, professional,
Yeah,
professional.
but often these go together, of course, because our professional life is a large part of our life as such. I think I will come to a few points in particular, but things that I really like over and above what I've said already is the fact of being part of an international community. The fact that we are talking here, a Belgian talking to Colombians, for example, it's a very natural thing for us. But that's a real treasure. The fact that we actually don't know countries because we visited them as a tourist, but we know countries and parts of the world because we collaborate with people there, and you get to know it as part of a truly global community. And I think everybody would, I think, be encouraged in this profession to make sure that you build an international network. And of course, in this day and age, this may seem a little bit more difficult than it has been because of COVID, but that will, let's hope that not always be there. And of course, we now have so many good communication tools that we can maintain a network also when we don't always physically travel. But of course, physical travel is crucially important. Certain things you have to do while meeting in person. Once somebody said, traveling is interesting, but even more so, it makes you interesting because you actually get to get a good feel for how things work, how cultures function in other parts of the world. So there is that. There is another point I would like to bring to the forefront, and that is something that actually I was not expecting, and in a way nobody was in the same way, but that is the ability to contribute in the current crisis to the crisis management of COVID. So I already mentioned that that I have been involved in infectious diseases for a fairly long time. That's one thing. So I've referred to the fact that I've been involved for a long time in infectious diseases. And from one thing came the other. And in our department, we now have a fairly large group headed by Neil Hans that is devoted fully to infectious diseases. Now, of course, the crisis comes. And what does the government do? It calls upon the groups that are available and where the expertise lies, the statistical expertise, the virologic expertise, the immunological expertise, the, as we call it, infectiology, etc. So, to cut a long story short, where we are now is that several of us, including me and Neil Hans, have been serving on government bodies in Belgium. And of course, as I said before, Belgium is a small country, and that means that there is a lot of abroad. We are very quickly in our neighboring countries, so the work that we do also in that respect is continually in collaboration with colleagues from the neighboring countries, of course. But there comes a point where you say, well, this is maybe a the point in my career where a number of things that I have been doing all those years now come to fruition. They can really be made to value. And when I say my career, I should basically say our career, because in a crisis this big, one thing is absolutely clear. you cannot do it on your own. You need to work together with a large number of people. That's what we do. But you need to have a solid home base. And that home base is a very large group of colleagues who have been doing fantastic research. And I refer to Neil Hens, but there is also Crystal Faas. There are many, many others that have very strong international links in their own right. But now a very important thing is that have developed over the decades a culture of working together. Within the department and across. But I think we have managed to establish a culture in our department, and that's I bias that in Hasselt in Leuven, but there is also a strong collaboration with the University of Antwerp, where people enjoy the pleasure of working together. It's not like I'll shield off my research so that I get better and you won't. That leads nowhere. That's short-term gain. The long-term gain is a good, stable group where there is a culture of working together. And when a crisis comes, a group may be as large as it is, but it's too small. You need to add more people to that group, etc. We've done that. I think the group working on COVID now is twice the size that it was in March 2020. But the fact that you can do research. I talked about mathematics. I talked about the applied case, the substantive case, which in this case is COVID, which is so multifaceted. There is the epidemiology, there is mathematical modeling, there is the clinical trials, there is there's vaccination studies, etc. There is so many different aspects, and that already is rich enough. That's what I said earlier. But on top of that, there is now the constant communication with two more parties. One is policymakers, the government, and Belgium is a complicated federal state. So we have a federal government, we have regional governments, we have provinces, etc. In other words, a lot of authorities to talk to, and the public opinion. Because we all know, many of the people listening to this will know that an infectious disease, and especially a pandemic, is extremely complex, which means that even though policymakers normally talk to the public opinion and vice versa, supported by political scientists, etc., now suddenly both biomedical, but also people like us, statisticians, exact scientists, have to play a role to explain, for example, what it is exponential growth, what it is, for example, to flatten the curve, what vaccination rate you should minimally try to reach to, for example, allow for a more or less normal life, etc. So there is a lot of uncertainty at the same time. And many people hate uncertainty. People like certainty. But then we should realize that we statisticians, we are the experts of uncertainty. Yeah, we know the mathematics. Mathematicians know mathematics. I would be surprised otherwise. We know mathematics, but on top of that, we are the experts of error, I sometimes say, or of uncertainty. So we have a gift and that's a profession, or a specific feature that is, we like to study uncertainty. And now comes a time that we can also communicate about that with the general public. It's not easy, there is a huge resistance against it, especially in a crisis that drags on forever. But we are at least in a position to be able to explain things that are difficult to many others. And of course, we should realize that we cannot do that on our own. We need constant input of all the professions that I mentioned before, a vaccinologist, virologist, etc. But what I've also found very satisfactory is that this is a time when we can work on a daily basis with top experts in all those other fields as well. So no matter how bad it is to have a crisis like this, every crisis means good opportunities. The further interaction within our own field, but as applied statisticians, that's also our genome. The ability to interact with people across many fields, and often very good people, top people, and then interact with politicians, I think that's a very satisfactory thing. And don't get me wrong, I hate this crisis just as anybody else, but we need to do our best to manage it. And if that can be done in a professionally satisfying environment, why not, of course?
Thank you, Professor, for sharing with us this experience and these comments about that.
Yes, very interesting. Now, on the other hand, we would like to know what moment of your professional life has been the most difficult.
Yeah, I think that the good moments actually outperform the less good moments. But I think again I can give something general and then again something about the COVID crisis, because the COVID crisis, I'll start there. It's of course a catalyzing moment. Everything goes fast. The history is actually going at a different pace than usually. In spite of what I said before, communication with politicians, etc., and with the public opinion, there are times that we as statisticians, together with a few other professions, are about the only ones to still see that there are major risks. And if you don't manage to get the message across, and you see that decisions are taken that actually lead entirely the wrong way, there's nothing you can do about it, but wait for the train crash to happen, so to speak. That's very frustrating. And I'll give an example. I think you can give Colombian examples. There are examples from every country, almost every country in the world. But at the end of August 2020, we had managed, this summer didn't go as well as we planned last year in 2020, not very different from 2021. We had a flare-up in certain cities in August. We were able to more or less manage that, but not as much as we would have liked near the end of August. And then the school year and the working year started in September 2020. Numbers were rising and the government relaxed measures anyway, because they thought, well, it's okay, we need to go back to our normal life, more or less. It's time to call this crisis closed. We now have just to learn how to live with the virus. And that's a nice slogan, but we knew that it was going to go wrong. And before we knew, and that happened late October, early November 2020, we had incidences in certain parts of the country above 3,000. We had one of the most severe peaks on the planet at that point. And we all felt that this was completely preventable from a scientific perspective. Let me add, from a statistical, mathematical, epidemiological perspective. But you realize that there are other factors. There is miscommunication, there is social media, conspiracy theories, there are political agendas, etc. There are sectors closed with a natural willingness to open again, but yet, you know, all of that may be true. And in normal times, this gives rise to political interaction and political compromises. But I've always said this time is a little different, because the virus is not around the table and does not participate in the compromise. And it doesn't feel it's bound by it. And yes, what really made it, of course, we say, okay, numbers are rising again, etc. But it gets very concrete if you say by the end of August 2020, we had 10,000 deaths in Belgium, a country of 11.5 million people. By the end of the year, we were to 20,000. And somehow we felt that even though the first 10,000 could have been lower, big mistakes were made, but in the beginning, it's new, you're surprised. Yes, but by 4 or 5 months into the crisis, you know what's happening. You understand what's happening. If you then don't act and there is another 10,000 deaths, that's a bitter pill to swallow. And in a way, it feels like a failure, even though we did everything we could to communicate. But I mean, the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. If it doesn't materialize, it doesn't materialize. Of course, when you talk to colleagues like we are doing now, but across the globe, you see that the concerns and sometimes the frustrations are the same everywhere. And I'm giving this COVID example to broaden, if I want to broaden the question or the answer a little bit, there are of course moments like that throughout your career where you feel, for example, that a decision taken, let's say within the university or within the research institute, is not to the best interest of science or the institution. For example, there is a new tendency, a new trend. Let me go back in time a little bit. Bioinformatics starts, big data starts, data science starts, etc. There is a new group of people suddenly center stage, and that's fine. Rejuvenation is a good thing. But then suddenly the impression is also in policymakers, there we go again, but then at university levels, that yeah, statistics is a science of the past. Now it's all data science. We have so much data. We have, and have nothing against data science, quite on the contrary. And there is such good tools available to extract information from data that we no longer need statistics. Well, of course, having been president of the IBS, and having looked at the history of our profession a little bit, which, depending on how you look at it, is not very old, especially biostatistics is a bit over a century old. There was, of course, mathematics is millennia old, so is medicine, but statistics, mathematical statistics is a few centuries older, but probability in particular, but it's a fairly recent profession, and yet we have seen several times that there was this major revolution in our profession. From clinical trials, or from trials, agricultural and clinical trials, to epidemiological study, major revolutions. People had to do suddenly something as advanced as logistic regression. And I'm now talking the 1950s, of course, which was a major challenge because there were no good computers to do it properly yet at that time. Then later, as I said, statistical genetics, bioinformatics came, the omics came, big data came, data science came, etc. And every time there is a feeling that, and sometimes through people in different fields, let it be civil engineers or computer scientists, that now they are center stage. And if you then see that decisions are taken to basically downplay the role of statistics to the advantage of the novelty, there is enough history. It's a bit like in the COVID example, where you know that this is not going to go well. And before you know, they will be back at the statistician's doorstep. And that's what happened. And of course, the current crisis in a way brings it all nicely together, because what I've noticed in our country, and we've tried to contribute that to that a little bit, if I would have said 5 years ago to somebody at a reception or a party, I'm a biostatistician, people would either have said, oh, that's nice, and leave it at that, or said, what do you mean by that? So never waste a good opportunity in a crisis. I think people like Neil Hens and we decided to call ourselves coherently in the media biostatisticians. And now everybody knows the term, uses the term. Many people hate us, of course. That's the way it goes. But at least they know the concept. They know the term, and so you basically turn something that can be negative into something positive, of course. So yeah, there have been a few difficult moments, but in retrospect, I think if you can turn it around and learn from the crises and from the mistakes, let it be a paper that's rejected on the one hand or something a little bit bigger than that. The saying is still, whatever doesn't kill you make you stronger.
That's true.
Yes. Professor, now we want to know what person influenced you the most in your professional life?
That's a very good question. And I think I have the answer ready for that. It's not one person. I think it's 5 people, 5 or 6 people. And the reason I know it so well is because I thought about it, of course, and there are actually people from early in my career, but they also know that I think that, because I said, hey, wait a minute, just imagine, and I hope not, but that I get killed by a bus these people would never know if I don't tell them. So I told them already, just in case they know about it. And a bit in random order, there is Emmanuel Safran, my thesis advisor, because as I said, when I was doing my civil service in the academic hospital in Leuven, I worked with him. We had good times together, and of course, like it always goes, we sometimes also quarreled, because that's how it goes between colleagues who work together a lot. But he installed, he established in me the love for the work that I'm doing. His own enthusiasm actually was infectious, and he infected me. And to stay in Leuven, as I said, Geert Verbeke was already there. We were PhD students. We got along fine. But over the years, we also developed a good professional working relationship. And he's one of the people in two directions where we have an idea, we throw out the idea. If it's right or wrong, we will criticize each other, etc. But we don't feel inhibited to just say what we think, and that has led to actually very good discussions and in the end good ideas. And over the years he's been not only a good colleague but also a good friend, and that has led to several books, several many short courses and other things that we have done together, and actually quite a bit of travel around the world as well. So that's number two. And then another person who early in my career was very important is Mike Kenworth from the UK, because he was there actually already at my PhD time. Through Emmanuel came my interest in multivariate categorical data. With Geert, mixed models came on the scene, and the missing data aspect, that's actually something that I got from Mike. And even though he's retired, we still work together a lot. So he's also been a very close friend, and that often goes together, a close friend and a good colleague. And if I look back on decades now of interaction with him, both the social as well as the statistical discussions have really made a difference for me. And Mike is one of those people where, for example, we know these days, if you want to do something and you need funding for that, you need to tell the funding agency exactly what you're going to do in every point and every comma. But in a way, research somehow happens haphazardly. You may have it's like you visit a city, you have a vague plan, but if you see something interesting, you just follow your intuition. We follow you. In Dutch, we say you follow your nose. You go where you think it's interesting. And Mike and I have always had that. We would sometimes get together, sometimes with a plan to discuss something. We discuss something completely different, and that turned into a paper. And sometimes we did not even have a plan. We started talking about general things. And after 10, 15 minutes, we were talking about statistics, and that led to papers. And that ability to interact with people that way, and so to give, let's say, creativity every chance, that I think I owe to to Mike. And then two more people I would like to mention now from Harvard are Louise Ryan, I already mentioned her, and Stuart Lipsitz. They were my main hosts when I was at Harvard University. And when I got to Harvard, the Harvard Biostatistics group, together with the huge AIDS clinical trials group and the huge cancer clinical trials group, was an enormous place. Harvard had more biostatisticians more statisticians than you would find in Belgium and the Netherlands combined, countries as a whole. Of course, that's a place where you can easily, there's many opportunities, but you can easily get lost. Everybody is busy, everybody is doing their work, and there's a visitor, you're very welcome. But a few people really took the time to make me very welcome, to show me around. Little did I know how it all worked, etc. And after that period, I felt I was part of the system, and after decades, I still feel I do. Now, more broadly, the American system. So, in a way, the American academic system through Harvard, but later also through other universities, has been a very important one for me. And it's not because I mentioned America that is the only country. I mentioned the UK. I have, of course, a lot of connections in Spain, in Latin America, in other European countries as well. And then a final person is Herman Kallart, who was the founding father of my department, the one that is now the one that I'm still belonging to. I biased that, and the hustle component. He was the founding father. He had a vision at one point to create a master in biostatistics. And a little later, he had a vision, even though the group like then, at that point, was completely mathematical statistics. He had a vision that there would be the need not just for teaching in biostatistics, but also research. And I was one of the hires to basically build that a little bit. Of course, it was not easy, because if there is the vision that a group should expand with biostatistics, but there is no tradition, you have to build it from scratch. And that's a time when I often had to think, do I want to do that now? Or do I rather go, for example, to a country like the United States or the UK, where it's all established and you go there and you're just part of a system? And I think even then, when I was younger, in my 20s still, I thought about that and I thought, no, my personality is more suited to build something. And to build something, you have to, first of all, find territory to build something on. So there will be conflicts and there will be fights, etc. And I'm not saying that I like that aspect, but it's inevitable. But at the end of the day, being able to contribute to the building of something, and the word contribute is important, because we should never have the arrogance to think that we build something, but to be able to contribute to the building of something, I've always enjoyed. And somebody like Herman Kallart has given me the opportunity and given me the chance, the freedom to make my mistakes and to learn from my mistakes as you grow older. So the whole bunch together that I mentioned, these 6 people have been absolutely instrumental in my career. And it's not limited. There are more people, but let's stop here on those people.
Yeah, very interesting, Professor. Thank you.
Okay, so our final question would be, what advice or final message would you like to give to young people who plan or are already starting a career in statistics?
I think one thing that you have to work out for yourself by some introspection, I think, and by just seeing it happen, is do you really like it? The most important thing, especially when it comes to research, and I think if you say career, that you think of a complete career where there is a component of teaching, a component of consulting sometimes, and a component of research. Now, these 3 components, they come in different mixes. There's 100% of your time that you spend to work. For some people, it will be 50% research. For some people, it will be 20% research, etc. Well, the first thing that I have to say is I've always liked, and that's something to think about, the fact that there is that mix, because there are the 3 components, and that means there is two-way interactions between research and teaching, between research and consulting. Sometimes you have a consulting problem, you work with a colleague from another department, and you solve the problem, and that's it. Somebody comes with a problem, they don't know what to do with their data, they have no clue whatsoever, and after 30 seconds you realize it's a regression problem, you help them, and that's it. No new research for you. The satisfaction that you help somebody, but not the satisfaction in that case of doing something novel statistically in terms of research. But there are, of course, many other occasions where you say, that's a good question. And I can help you. There is something available, but then we have to ignore this, or we have to approximate that, or we have to, but to do it really properly, it's possible, but that would require some further research. So that's, I think, very interesting. and very important, and a piece of advice, therefore, try to make sure to build your career around the 3 pillars, and you will see that there is a lot of cross-fertilization between them. Because if you've had that problem from the consulting person, and you took it further and you did some research, and then you say, hey, and this could also serve several other problems, and maybe my students should know, then in the end you're actually teaching about it. So then you have a 3-way interaction where all 3 nicely combine. But in all of that, a very important thing is that at least one of these components should almost feel like a hobby. And I hope you have other hobbies as well. There should be non-statistical hobbies too, of course. And in my case, that is actually research. When I can do research, it feels like a hobby next to other hobbies. It's that part of my work that I really feel like a hobby. It doesn't feel like I'm working. If you want to be creative, being creative on command, it's a bit difficult. Now, medieval painters, they actually did a lot of their work on command, but they were paid by somebody to do something, a bit like we got grant money. But what exactly they did, there was a lot of personality in it. And it's the same with research. A good piece of research, let's say a paper at the end of the day, should be a piece of art. That's a way to think about it. No matter how technical and mathematical it can be, that document that's there at the end of the day is, you should be as proud about it as a piece of artwork, as a sculpture or a theater play or a painting or whatever. It is in that sense not difficult from the creative act in the performing arts or in literature or whatever. And of course, it's not necessary that then the 2 other components are also equally hobby, because that would be asking too much. For example, I like to teach. Teaching is the part of my job I said that I like most, but research is even above that. Research I almost don't consider a job. It's the pleasure of doing that creative activity. And then in third instance, it's consultancy. Not that I don't like it, but if I need to rank them, that's the way I do it. So research should never be seen as an assignment neither. Sometimes I have PhD students who begin, and depending on their cultural background, they might say in the first meeting, Professor, what is my assignment? And then I usually say, there is no assignment. There is a problem that I think is worth working on, and that's already a different thing. And if the PhD student, of course, there have been intake discussions, etc., so people know what they're going to work on. But if you're going to do research, you really should develop a sense of what you really think is fun, is interesting to do. And no matter how much you may like the whole of statistics, certain things you may like to work on better than others. For example, I maybe work on missing data a little bit before survival analysis, for example, and for somebody else, it may be the other way around. And that can change. That can definitely change. And another piece of career advice, I've seen many people having excellent careers of various natures, because there is no one size fits all. But the most successful careers are often by people who have a very clear signature, like they're known for this. Let me give an example that many of you might know, Nan Laird. If you think of Nan Laird, you would say linear mixed models and the EM algorithm, things like that, missing data. Some people have good careers, but you say, yeah, they've done a lot of stuff. They've done a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that, and that's honorable too. But let's say, be a specialist in a few areas, and then also doing some work in some minor areas for you. That I think is a very healthy mix. By specializing in an area, you get something you're recognized for. People turn to you for this particular thing. And let me mention again my colleague Neil Hens. Mathematical modeling in infectious diseases is equal to Neil Hens and vice versa. He will have done other things. I've done other things other than longitudinal data and missing data. That's all nice and well, because that avoids you to become a one-trick pony, where if you're specialized in one thing, but it's only that thing, then it becomes a bit too narrow at the same time. So get some focus together with some secondary interests, so to speak. These are a few things that come to mind when we talk about advice. And then at the same time, a good piece of advice is don't take too much advice. Work it out for yourself.
Okay, Professor, we want to thank you for sharing these interesting and inspiring opinions and experience with us. Thank you also for listening. Hopefully you have enjoyed this interesting talk. We wait for you in an upcoming podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.